So I've had the Nothing Phone 3 for about 3 weeks now, and I have personal thoughts. To start off, this is my first ever Nothing device, literally my first Nothing product, so I may not be the best person to compare it with previous generations. Everything I say here comes from a fresh slate, just me and the Nothing Phone 3. Now, what's my experience been like with this weird looking phone? Because that has been the most common comment since I started using it, and honestly, the name Nothing isn't helping things. I always have to explain why my phone is called Nothing. But back on the topic, the Nothing Phone 3 is different from anything I've used before, different from how people around me see smartphones, different in what it offers, and different in the kind of gimmicks it brings. And we all love different, right? At least I do. It's refreshing to tap into something that doesn't just blend into the crowd. But is the Nothing Phone 3 different in any refreshing way? Well, that's very subjective. I have seen mixed opinions from users and observers, but here's my take. You need to experience this phone before making any real judgment, because it's easy to dismiss it by the unusual choice of design or the random thing going on near the camera layout, which looks like kids were hired to map out distances with their eyes closed. I do feel there's an explanation behind the design though, like something technical beyond the aesthetics and paparazzi. But if you do get out of the initial sentiments and just actually use it, you might find yourself rethinking things and not judge this book by its cover. So on the first note, the Phone 3 debuted with a completely overall design. I haven't used earlier Nothing phones, but I know how they looked, and it seems each release brings a new design signature. Now, whether it's likable to everyone or not, whether it makes sense or not, one thing it does is create a room for anticipation. The big three brands we know are famous for rehashing designs year after year that you can't really differentiate between models without diving through the settings. For Nothing, I'm glad they are carving a unique path, and while this design isn't widely celebrated, I personally like it. I rock with the weirdness, the boldness, and the personality. What I don't work with though is the material. The transparent glass back is flashy but very reflective and of course fragile. A tough third-party case might save you, but if you're a naked phone kind of person, it remains a risk. On the bright side for durability, you do get an IP68 water and dust resistance. The phone supports a 6.67-inch flat OLED display which features HDR10+, but 500 nits peak brightness, Corning Gorilla Glass 7 eye protection, and up to 120Hz dynamic refresh rate. The screen delivers that classic AMOLED punch, vibrant colors and crisp visuals. Screen interaction also feels good. Media is good looking with the HD very pronounced. I'm honestly not the greatest display critic because everything just seems to work fine for me. If it works, so no displeasures on that note. But 500 nits of peak brightness is also on the high when I look at phones I've used, though my Redmi GT7 gave up to 6000 nits. The Phone 3 however works just as the rest. It's visible all time of the day, and in extreme sunny conditions, I could still do a thing or two while pacing on the road without feeling like I'm overly struggling to. The Gorilla Glass 7i is a very familiar protection used in some mid-range phones I know and use, or in phones that do not cost near $700. It really wasn't the right choice for a device they intended to market at this price and strategic level, and it feels heavily like a cost-cutting choice. When Nothing unveiled they were creating their first true flagship, I believe everyone had their flagship expectations depending on what you hold to that word. Though this is the least of the expectations, but still could have used something stronger for a model that's marketed as Nothing's first true flagship. That said, the 120Hz refresh rate feels premium. Scrolling through pages and pages of web content, switching apps and overall navigation looks fluid and satisfying. The animations complements too. You can tweak the refresh rate if you want to balance between smoothness and battery life. The phone runs the Nothing OS Android skin based on the Android 15. After several updates rolled out since it started functioning outside of the box, I'm currently sitting at the version 3.5, which is supposed to be the latest. As a first-time Nothing user, the UI instantly became one of my favorite aspects. In fact, it was my most favorite thing upon first impression. And why is that? Well, because of the minimalism. I'm fond of having collections of Chinese phones, and we all know how they look like siblings when it comes to the features and the few headaches as well. Almost same UI layout, same color tones, same pieces of bloatwares and ads, same cool stuff, same bad stuff. But the Nothing just looked different to me. For me, it was something new for a long time in a while. Powering it on, the first thing that got to me was the color tone. The black and white theme is easy on the eyes and gives the interface a calm, modern vibe. It's important to note that switching the color tone is possible in the icon pack section in the customization settings. You can toggle between color and monochrome modes in settings, which is fun if your mood changes as often as mine does. But lately, the Nothing vibe does it for me. User experience here is clean and genuinely flagship-like. No ads, no bloat, no unnecessary clutter, just a smooth, minimal Android experience. For me, that's a big deal. Again, as someone coming from some Chinese brands, this feels refreshing. Now, let's talk about Nothing's trademark, the Glyph goodies. Inside the phone, the Glyph interface carries functions for nothing's most ambitious upgrade for the Phone 3, and that is the new Glyph Matrix. For a lot of past generation Nothing users, they've gotten familiar with Nothing integrating LED lights at the back of the devices that they called the Glyph light. Since I never got to use previous Nothing phones, I don't have expectations around this corner. The new Glyph Matrix happens to be the replacement, but is it a worthy one? I'm going to speak on my experience with the Matrix as someone who never experienced the past Glyph lights. The Glyph Matrix is a fun little feature that no one probably asked for but are getting and ends up playing with subconsciously. It's kinda like one of those little things and upgrades you get on your phone that aren't really impactful to the experience but just gets you hyper for the fun reasons and the way it's branded. So that's the Glyph Matrix. In its early stages, it doesn't really impact the experience but it's still something you want to have there to toggle around with when bored. You can run through a couple of playthings they call Glyph toys, each one with its own function like the digital clock, real-time battery percentage, spin the bottle, rock paper scissors, etc. But there's one standard feature that defies just being a gimmick for me. It's the Glyph mirror. Now hear me out, this is really functional in ways of taking advantage of the rear camera for really good selfie shots. What the Glyph mirror does is it uses the LEDs on the back to help you frame selfies in pixels using the rear camera while you stare at the dots to get your angle. And just like that, you can manage to frame yourself properly. It's surprisingly useful for capturing better quality selfies. With the Matrix, you can also customize what is known as essential notifications. So it's basically telling the display how it reacts by assigning icons or patterns to contacts or apps. Say like customizing icons to when your best friend texts you on Messenger. Cool, right? The icon could be one of the available ones or a custom one, like you can set a picture of the contact so you see their faces in Nothing pixels whenever you have a notification from them. These are probably the few practical uses I could squeeze out for making the Glyph Matrix count. Everything else feels non-essential, like is it battery checking when I could just spend less of the time flipping the screen instead of pressing my way through a series of other Glyph toys before I see my battery percentage. But though, there's a quick hack I discovered in the Manage Glyph section to help solve this. You can simply disable the toys you don't use and reorder the ones you use frequently for quicker access, so it makes pressing through it less annoying. If you often check timer battery, you could reorder it to make those two come up first whenever you pressure press on the button. Again, a little hack, but it doesn't mean it entirely redeems its significance. Here's the new essential button if you check the right hand side below the power button, and it is annoying. Not the function itself but the choice of physical placement. When I had my hands on this phone for the whole of the first week, I fought through pressing the secondary button whenever I needed to use the power button because we aren't used to having anything else there but just the power button. I can say I've adapted to the changes now, but it still wasn't the brightest idea. What the essential key does is work with the essential space. Now the essential space is Nothing's own data hub, kind of like how most stock notes app works, which makes this almost unusable for me no matter how hard I try. The button ties into the essential space. You can save screenshots, record voice notes, add AI summaries and organize them into collections. It's fine but honestly feels redundant when stock note apps already exist. By a single press, it is activated. By a long press, you can record a voice note along with the screenshot, and by a double press, it launches you directly into the space. Aside the essential space, you can't remap the button yet, so it's fully dedicated to the essential space. The optical fingerprint here is responsive even when the fingers sweat, but that only happens sometimes as it can also struggle in other occasions. I don't know, I just feel the flagship thing to have done here would have been to make the sensor placement a little higher up the screen. The Phone 3 is powered by the Snapdragon 8S Gen 4, a light version of the 8 Elite. Performance feels every bit flagship level, which is very capable for a normie. In fact, I barely wonder what the difference would be since I run every game I have played on max settings. But I know the differences are usually around the technical bits, the benchmarks and spec sheets. In real life use, you definitely feel like you're using a flagship. Operations run smoothly, the interface is snappy, general performance is fluid, games run smoothly with very stable frames on max settings and would become a hot splatter under extended gaming but not excessively. That I believe is every all-rounder phone issue since there aren't any exaggerated cooling hardware like you get on dedicated phones. So for the realistic things you do with it, you are sure to get that power performance. I mean, what else is there to ask? Honestly, unless you're obsessed with benchmarks, you won't even notice much difference from the Elite version. I think the complaints are just people trying to justify the price, and I'm not agreeing with the price either. Since it's $799, I'd say nothing might have as well given the latest chipset. The stereo speaker sounds fine with good audio clarity. For me at least, you can judge from listening.
Hey yo!
The 5150 mAh battery supports up to 65 watt while charging. Now, nothing didn't include a brick in the box, but luckily I have a 66 watt PD fast charger at home and it supports the Nothing phone. It was able to power up in a little over an hour. There's a recorded charging test on that. The phone lasts depending on what you use it for. For me, well, I do daily social media, not compulsory gaming, music playing, non-frequent video watching, so that's basically saying I do the most basic things and the battery has got me good and easily lasts the entire day. I use some phones with higher capacities and I feel like I'm getting the same level of efficiency altogether. There's one really good thing about this phone and it's the fact that it supports reverse wireless charging, which means by activating battery share and slapping your phone against other phones, you can power them on the go, a very cool and practical feature. It's just 5 watts, I know, but I mean when it's an emergency or about assisting someone, that will definitely come true. Finally, we have the cameras. Nothing has put 50 megapixel on all 4 lenses. That makes up for a 50 megapixel wide angle, a 50 megapixel periscope telephoto, a 50 megapixel ultra wide, and a 50 megapixel front facing camera. I'll hold your hand when I say that the photos here are good. I've been impressed enough to share several shots online already. When it comes to smartphone cameras, I love close-up captures and that makes the telephoto lens my favorite. The telephoto here beautifully separates the subject from the background with a natural cinematic blur with no extra editing needed. Normally, I would love boosting contrast for these kind of photos, but the Phone 3 did the complete job and rendered any extra editing useless. But it isn't all perfection though. With my time with it, I noticed lighting conditions matters a lot in extracting the best photographs, so it isn't really very versatile. On my observation, the best time happens to be the hours between late afternoons to sunset when the sun is softer and not overly saturated, famously called the golden hour. Trust me, this is when you get the most good looking daytime results. Peak noon and moody weather shots can look washed out or overexposed. The ultra wide is a good way of capturing a wider field of view. It does its job well, though I don't use it much often. There's a cool addition Nothing has introduced into the Phone 3 called camera presets. This allows you to apply already made settings and filters you feel will make your shots nicer without going through the process of doing all the work from scratch. And these are made by fellow users, which means you can make yours and share. Now that's a fun way to co-create with your community. So overall, I do like the camera on the Phone 3 since my time with it. Videos at 4K 60fps are nice and look solid, but I don't really tend to use that often. So that is the Nothing Phone 3 and the impressions it had on me as a new recruit to the ecosystem. It does what I expect of it, delivers where it counts, feels good to hold and compact in my hands because I do have larger palms. Yes, I've gotten that compliment since posting photos of holding the Phone 3. The curved edges makes it even more comfortable to hold longer. Display pops, processor delivers in graphics and performance, camera works super brilliant in the right cases, software feels refreshing and clean. Overall, the experience feels like a breath of new air. It performs like a flagship and brings a unique personality that I think is rare in today's market. I don't know if this effect will fade anytime soon or improve, but right now the Nothing Phone 3 does feel like something worth keeping. That is if you agree with my reasons.